After we sing a hymn and say a prayer, get to know each other a little bit. Sound good? Hymn number 19, we thank you, God, for a prophet. Josie will play for us. Thanks, Josie. Let's sing all three verses. And then we've got Curtis that will give us an opening prayer.
Our dear Father in heaven, we're grateful this afternoon for the opportunity which we have to come here and to learn how to be more effective teachers and to fill thy Spirit. We ask for thy Spirit to be upon us throughout this meeting, that we might receive thy guidance and inspiration individually and collectively as to how we might edify others and how we might be edified ourselves. Please bless those who are teaching and instructing, that they will be guided by thy hand, and that we will also be guided, and that our ears will be open, and that our hearts will be open as well to receive thy instruction. These things we ask in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen. Amen.
All right. Sounded good. Thanks, Josie, for playing, and Curtis for praying. We're just going to get to know each other a little bit. It looks like we've probably got well over 50% new teachers here, right? Feels like it. This is a new-looking group. A very, very nice-looking group, by the way. Way to go. And I know. There was a
we were great too.
Well, we'd like to get to know you a little bit, so we'll just simply have you do this. Could you come up one at a time, just because we are on YouTube right now. No pressure. It's not live. No, but I mean virtually right now. Later we'll be right now on YouTube, you know what I mean? But come up here, tell us your name, tell us where you're from, where you're teaching, and would you give us an interest outside of seminary teaching, something that you're just into, that you like, okay? So if it was me, I'd say, hi, I'm Brother Boyle. And I'm teaching at the UVU Institute. I'm teaching the pre-service class. And what else did I say? I'm from Idaho. I grew up in Twin Falls and Boise, Idaho. And an interest. It's a hard one, right? I love basketball. I play far too much basketball.
There's no
Yeah. Well, if there was, I did it. What's that?
The guy I played basketball last
Wow.
So, you wouldn't think looking at this that there was anything dangerous. There's really not. Are you talking about Brother Raleigh? Yeah. That really wasn't my fault. Really?
That's exactly what I used in basketball.
Right place, the right time. So anyway, come on up here. Name, where you're teaching, where you're from, some interest that you have. Jordan, can we start over here? Thank you.
So I'm Jordan Ellsworth. I am teaching at Lehigh High, and I'm from St. George, Utah. I'm at BYU studying mechanical engineering, and I love racquetball.
Thanks, Jordan.
You too.
I'm Amy Taula. I'm from Arizona. I'm teaching at Payson Junior High. And I love all things healing. I'm a massage therapist, so I like to heal in all good ways.
As opposed to bad healing.
Yes,
Right.
exactly.
I hate that.
I know. Yes, thank you. Medicine.
Awesome. So I'm Grant Merriam. I'm from Logan, Utah, and I'm teaching at Skyridge High School right now. And something I love is being a dad. I have 2 twin little girls that are 16 months old at home, so it's awesome.
Aww.
No one did it.
Sorry,
I'm Lindsay Wade. I'm from Gilbert, Arizona. I'm at BYU studying political science, and I like to swim. I did it competitively for like 10 years. Yeah.
Thanks, Lindsay.
My name is Wyatt. I am from Hurricane, Utah. Yes. Hurricane. Yeah, you said it right. And I teach here at Mountain View in this room. And I really like playing basketball. I really enjoy trying to hurt Brother Boyle as well. I actually helped sprain his
Actually
ankle.
twist my ankle a little bit.
Yes.
Yeah, but I deserved it.
It was with my hands too. I just
Yeah, just grab it. Takes a while.
I'm David Chamberlain. I'm from Saginaw, Michigan. I graduated from BYU in mechanical engineering. I love my family as well. And I also love college football. BYU Cougars, Michigan State Spartans. Yeah.
Which one of those is not like the other these days?
Yeah. I'm not a huge fan, but I beat them last time I watched the game.
My name is Dalton Bennett. I'm from West Valley City, Utah. I'm studying history, religious history at BYU. What else was my hobby?
What do you mean religious history?
So you study history at BYU, and then you can specialize in anything. And so I'm taking every single class BYU has about religion and in the history department.
Are you going to be in Dr. Underwood's class this semester?
Sometime Brother Underwood and I will cross paths, but it has yet to happen.
You gotta go this semester, it's gonna be fun.
Well, it's a little late for that now. And I love skiing. I started last year. I'm horrible at it. Like, there's like little kids who like pass me and they laugh at me, and I just like try and throw stuff at them and I fall over. It's great, but I love it. So,
Awesome. Please don't.
My name is Kinsey Doyle. I'm also a BYU student studying sociology. I'm from Pennsylvania, and I'm teaching at Salem Junior High. What was the other? Oh, I really like to dance.
What kind of dance?
Show us.
I really like Latin dance. I served a mission in Brazil, so I learned a little bit about. So yeah, that's me.
Awesome. Very good. Thanks, Kenzie.
So my name's Jackson Haight. I'm also a BYU student studying business management, and I'm originally from Boston, Massachusetts. And I love to swim. That's me.
Awesome. Thanks, Jackson. Where are we at? Let's go. Let's go. Michael, we'll do Chris later.
Later.
Okay.
My name is Michael Hancock,
and I am from Cedar Hills, Utah, and I did not go to BYU. I went to SUU. My interest is Spider-Man. I think that was the name. I'm a Spider-Man fanatic.
Thanks, Michael.
Oh,
Chris?
I'm teaching at
Oh, yeah.
Frontier Middle School, sorry.
Frontier Middle School.
In Eagle Mountain, and they know that I'm a Spider-Man fanatic already.
So are we saying name?
Name where you're teaching, where you're from, some interest that you have outside of seminary.
So my name's Christopher Bross. I'm teaching up at Lone Peak High School. Yes. The Dalton is Sarah here?
That's where I was.
She's not here.
There's Sarah right there.
Oh, there you are, Sarah. So you guys are with me there. And then I'm from Salt Lake City and done something outside of seminary. Astrophysics, that's what I was going to go into. I love astrophysics, like deeply, passionately.
Who doesn't?
I've got a big old telescope and I was just studying the Fermi paradox right before I came to study.
That counts.
All right, let's come up, Dakota.
My name is Dakota Jake. I'm from Sandy, Utah. BYU, studying psychology. I love soccer, anything, playing, watching, learning about history, whatever. I teach at, well, I will be teaching at Provo High. So I'm excited.
Awesome, thanks, Dakota.
My name is Michael Richardson. I'm teaching at Lehigh, and I'm from Elk Ridge, Utah. And one of my interests, I'm not very good at it, but I like singing. I enjoy singing. So.
All right, let's go.
Yeah, let's go. I'm not very good at it. This one comes in
What a song. Who doesn't know that song?
I'm Cole Morgan. I'm from Sandy, Utah. I teach at Willow Creek Middle School, and I got a drone for Christmas, so that's my new hobby. It's pretty cheap and it will fall, but it's really fun to watch it fly for the 30 for the.
Right, does it have an embedded camera and you can like watch?
Yeah, but the camera's about as good. Think of your first cell phone. That's the camera. So we took a picture and put it on Facebook.
Yes. Brother Boyle's first camera was their first phone when it had a camera.
Yeah, very true. That's true.
Still doesn't actually.
You done?
I'm done being insulted.
So I'm Curtis Call. I'm from Pleasant Grove, right by Cedar Hills. I'm teaching at Springville High School, and I like most of the things that you guys already said, except for that one back there. I don't even know. I didn't know how to pronounce it. Don't even know what it is.
I can leave.
But anything. No, it's good. I like anything outdoors, backpacking, hiking, mountain biking, all that stuff. So.
Very good. Thanks, Chris.
Oh, I was fumbled, my bad.
My name's Sarah Bradley. I grew up in Las Vegas and in Utah. I'm an English teacher at an alternative school across the freeway, but I'd say the name, but it wouldn't matter. And I am teaching seminary at Lone Peak with Dalton and Chris. And I'm really passionate about BYU baseball, because BYU basketball broke my heart.
I'm Josie Payne. I'm from Fremont in Utah. I graduated from Utah State, and I'm teaching at Oak Canyon Junior High. And my passion is weightlifting. I love it. So.
Like powerlifting?
I won Utah State's women's powerlifting meet, but now I'm like into bodybuilding more so. So.
I can tell. I can tell.
All you have to do is follow Brother Martin on Facebook and you'll know that it's true what he just said. My name is Adam James and I teach at Springville. I'll be at Springville this semester. I'm from Virginia originally, Woodbridge, Virginia, about 30 miles south of DC. So really the only thing I like to do, so my wife and I, we have 7 children. So I graduated from BYU, but in 2008, so 10 years ago. So my passion is just spending time with them. I don't have a whole lot of it, so that's what I do. Basketball, outdoor stuff, camping stuff with them, but it's all around the family, so
Awesome, thanks, Alan. Full-time job plus seminary teaching, right?
Yeah.
Ain't nothing. All right, yeah.
Me? Okay, sorry. I'm Hannah Julian. I'm teaching at American Fork Junior and also Lake Ridge Junior here in Orem. I grew up in Escondido, California, which is like right outside of San Diego. And I have a lot of passions. This weekend it was definitely Lord of the Rings. So my roommate had never seen any of them, and so we like watched all 3 Lord of the Rings, and then I made her sit through all 3 Hobbits. And then my entire letter to my little brother was this epic allegory of how the Hobbit and the Gospel, and it was awesome. So
Did you
that's
extend,
my
extended editions?
well, duh. That's entirely good. Tell me, it's like 4 hours for what?
I'm Jared Erickson. I'm from Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. I'm teaching at Alpine Junior. It's the Timberline Middle School out there, and I also love the outdoors, and I love barroom dancing as well.
Very good. Jared?
How do you dance barroom?
What? Ballroom dancing. Sorry.
Oh, barn dancing.
I love barn dancing too. It's actually my second passion.
I'm Spencer McGee. I'm also from Sandy, Utah. My last semester at BYU started today, if I pass all my classes. And I'm at Maple Mountain High School, and my passion is being single and ineligible for hire. It's wonderful.
Be less passionate.
Be more passionate.
No tape.
Hi, I'm Jason Campbell. I grew up here in Orem. I'm teaching at Timpview High School, which I'm excited about. And we have 5 kids, so I love going to my kids' dance recitals or when they sing or their sports games. I love going to that stuff. So probably a little too much. My kids get a little tired of it, but I love going to those.
Are you the loud dad in the crowd?
Yeah, and I always think the coach doesn't know what they're doing.
Good, Braden.
So I'm Braden. I am from Santa Quinn, Utah, but I have moved like 21 times in my life, so I've been everywhere. So I've been to Arizona, Gilbert. Yep. Yeah, we're actually neighbors, so now, you know, I didn't know that about her, about Arizona, so even more connection. I love everything about basketball. I'm a Phoenix Suns fan, so that shows how dedicated I am. They're doing awful. But Phoenix Suns, I really want to know where this basketball league is that you guys play in, because even though it doesn't look like it, and I'm not tall, or we won't go into other details, I love basketball, so I'd love to play with you guys. Let's see, what else? Oh, I'm at ALA, which is American Leadership Academy. It's a pretty cool place. I liked it. It's been fun. Is that it?
What do you like?
What do I like?
Basketball.
Basketball.
I was paying
Yeah.
attention.
I mean, I can go into more detail, you know. Netflix, sleeping. Yep. So, yeah, that's me.
Thanks, Braden. Oh, that's great. Very good to get to know you better. So this semester, as you know, we'll be meeting every other Monday here, approximately. You have that schedule, so everybody does have that schedule, yes? But how well this goes is just like any class, right? How much you put into it, how much you bring to it, really makes a difference on how productive this time is that we're together. So we appreciate your eagerness, your anxiousness, and your prayers for us as we teach and train. So we're going to turn the time over to Brother Hunt for a training today. Brother Hunt.
It is important that you get to know each other really well and your colleagues, and you help each other out a lot. We've had, in years past, we've had times where when the notifications came about whether someone was hired or not, they were together. They were having family evening together, or a barbecue or things like that. And you can become pretty good resources for each other as well as good friends. Sister Vance and Sister Card have some business that I forgot we needed to try to cover, and so we'll let them take some time right now, and then I'll jump in.
Does everybody have the schedule for the choir rehearsal? So you just pass those out in case you wanted to attend the choir rehearsals. There's only 2 left. If you do go to them, turn in those hours on your administrative line units. This is one of the rehearsals about an hour and a half or something. So turn that in on your admin hours. And going up to the evening with the general authority, you can turn in a travel voucher. We like getting carpools, we like getting travel vouchers from everybody. And you're, in your units, you're already paid for having gone there, so you're not paid extra for going to the evening with the general authority, but you can get reimbursed for the travel. Any questions?
So the time they're already compensated for with the travel.
Okay, I don't know about the green folders, but the blue folders have your information sheet, those that are returning student teachers. If you would take a look at that and a quick look to see if there's anything that needs to be corrected. If you've moved, if you've had a new baby, if you've gotten married, any other new job in a church, anything that's different that needs to be changed on that, would you make that change, and we're going to gather those papers up right now. And if there are no changes, just put no change, and we'll collect your paper. And also in that folder, I think all of you that have had changes in your assignments, there will be your units changed so that you can see what you're supposed to be putting down for your units in this.
So you want them to either make changes or write no change and then pass it back? Or?
Yes, that would be awesome.
Okay.
And I think that was that all? Oh, and then we just have a refresher. Meeting schedule. Is that all that you're going to use?
Okay, thank you for that. Will you endure a little story real quick? I think we'll kind of establish a little foundation, a little context for what we're going to talk about. At one point in my career, I was coordinating Seminary Institute programs in Indiana, and the office where I was, it was a shared building. It was a chapel in downtown Indianapolis, and it was okay during the day. It was a little scary at night, but it was okay during the day, but still a little dicey, enough of a neighborhood that we had to keep the doors locked when we didn't have students around, and there wasn't safety in numbers. And so because it wasn't much of a daytime program, when I was there at my office and no one else was around, I would be locked into the building. There was a little ringer where if there were deliveries or anything like that, they could ring a bell, and from time to time people would ring that bell and they'd ask for money, or you know, everyone always ran out of gas on their way to the hospital, and it was always things like that. One day that bell rang, and I went, and as I walked towards the door, this individual was looking in, and you could see a look of relief on his face when he saw motion coming down the hallway. He could make out that someone was coming down the hallway. So I came out and I opened the door and I asked him how I could help him, and he said, I just have to have somebody to talk to. He says, "This is a Mormon church, right?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, Can I just, do you have some time that I could just talk with you?" And I said, "Absolutely." And I let him come in, and he sat down in my office, and he told me his story that I'm going to summarize for you. The conversation I had with him was about 3 hours long. And but in a nutshell, here's the gist, okay? He was a member of the church and had grown up LDS, was not terribly active, and had made a series of really, really ridiculously bad choices, and had ended up in jail, in prison in Ohio. He had been released from that prison. He had served his sentence and been released the day before, but was on a restriction. I can't remember what's the word they use for that. Probation. Thank you. He was on probation, and one of those terms was he needed to report back within 24 hours, stating that he had somewhere to stay. That was one of the requirements, and he was not to leave the state. And I was in Indiana. So as he told me the story and everything that was going on, I was like, wait, you told me you weren't supposed to leave Ohio. You know we're in Indiana. And he said, I know, and he just started talking about a series of, he panicked, he couldn't get a place to stay, he didn't know what to do. He borrowed a car from a friend, drove to Indiana, all these different things that had kind of come to bear, and he drove past the LDS church and he recognized it. That's a Mormon church. And he thought, I know they're usually not there unless it's a Sunday, but I gotta try. And he saw a car parked in the back, and that's when we met. I'm not gonna tell you the whole life story of this man, but suffice it to say that from the time that the man was a teenager until he was sitting there with me, and he was probably in his 40s, every decision he made took him further from where he wanted to be. Every decision. It was the most awful, slow motion train wreck of a story that you would ever hear. It was so heart-wrenching. He would tell me about what was going on, and he came to this decision-making point in his life. And in my mind, I'm thinking, I hope you chose path A, and it was always path B. Every single time. As we talked for 3 hours, because he was trying to figure out what he should do, and I was trying for 3 hours to persuade him to get back in the car, go back to Ohio, and present himself to his probation officer. But he got to know me a little bit, and he knew that, I told him I have pictures of my family, and I was active in the church, obviously, and everything. And at one point he said, you have the life I want. That's what I want. And I said to him, you're doing everything wrong to have that life. It's not that it's impossible for you to have, it's that you aren't choosing to have it. Just one thing after another, and I could tell you so much more. I finally persuaded him to go back to Ohio, present himself to his probation officer. It would be a little bit late. He would be a little bit late, and there might be some consequences for that, but to present himself there. I got a letter from a jail in Columbus about 2 weeks later. It was from him. And he said, after I left your office, I got back in the car, and I drove towards Ohio. I got tired, so I stopped at a rest stop on the Indiana side, and a police car driving along was checking license plates, and the car that I was in was a stolen car. He had taken it from his friend, who had taken it from his grandma, who had not told his grandma he was taking it from her. And so it had been reported stolen, and so he was picked up outside of Ohio in a stolen car, back in jail. But in the letter, he said, he talked about being tired of making these short-sighted concessions, these short-term decisions, and started talking about what he was doing while he was there, and he was starting to choose plan A instead of consistently plan B. It's pretty hard to watch and to listen to. We wanted to take a little bit of time. We won't take a lot. We're just going to take about a half an hour together, have a little discussion. Some of you might have gotten a very late email saying that if you had a laptop, bring it. I still don't know if we're going to do it that way or if we'll just talk about things together as a group. Hope you'll forgive me for not being real settled on how I want to approach it. Elder Maxwell once said, part of discipleship is becoming high-yield, low-maintenance members of the church. High-yield, low-maintenance members of the church. So, can you just talk through it? Did I spell maintenance right? Okay. No, but that.
Good enough for me.
I'm from Cedar City, so you gotta help me out. Is that how you spell maintenance? high yield, low maintenance members of the church. I initially, we sent you a link, it's on the Facebook group page as well. It's a Google Doc we could fill out, you could fill out as groups. I think Colin and Audible, we're just gonna talk through it together, okay? Can we talk about what's in each of those boxes? I don't care which box we take first, but can you just try to describe them? Don't use names, look at you know. But can we just try to describe how you've seen it? And this may take a little thinking through and talking through, but what do each of those boxes look like? And I don't care which one we take first. Please start us out,
There's a
Jared.
devotional, so I went to BYU Idaho for a year, and there's a devotional where the head engineer of BYU Idaho gave the devotional talk, and he talked about being highlight, low watt disciples.
Highlight, low watt.
So
So
he talks about-
you're exuding without consuming.
So we talked about incandescent light bulbs, how they put out good light, but it's a lot of watt, it's a lot of power. They go out fairly often, and they have to replace multiple times a year. But with the new lights they have, they can run for a couple of years. They are a lot lower in maintenance, overall value, and they can put out just as bright of light for only 15 watts or 10 watts even.
Yeah, I bought 18-year light bulbs this weekend.
And so anyway, so we just talked about how
I wrote about it in my journal.
So we just talked about how that's not only saved the church millions of dollars just by switching light bulbs, but also that's the kind of disciples we should be.
That's a great comparison. I appreciate that. Yeah, I love that. That's a great comparison. So, well, yeah, okay, cool.
I would say high maintenance would be you are constantly needing to be corrected in things.
Good.
If you're a high maintenance member of the church, you need to be told what to do.
So, can I have you help?
Yeah.
So will you come up and under high maintenance in both boxes, put frequent need of correction in both of those boxes? So it'd be true of both, right?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
I think in the high maintenance, high maintenance, high yield, that little box. I think that those are really good people, and they have a lot to offer, and they are very spiritual, and they believe in the gospel. But just this, they constantly need to be reminded that they're really great, or they need some kind of praise that they're really great, or they need to be pushed to do what is right. But they have really good things to offer. Does that make sense?
Good. Some of these things, by the way, as you hear them, will you come up and put that? How should we write it briefly? Constant need of motivation?
Yes.
We all need motivation. It doesn't make you a bad person needing to be motivated, and you will always be corrected throughout your career, always. So we're not trying to suggest these are really condemning things, but you start forming a picture about what's in both of those boxes. Okay, what else? Adam, I saw your hand, and then Dakota.
I've just had the opportunity to interact with different members where constantly their poor decisions and the results thereof, they go back to leaders, to home teachers, to other people to seek help to get out of the problems that they're in, because their own decisions that put them in that situation.
Yeah.
So I don't know how to verbalize that in a short sentence, but I've seen that many times.
They need to be rescued frequently.
Yeah, so yeah,
Would you?
rescued frequently, yeah.
Okay, Dakota, and then Kinsey.
I think it applies to all of these. The last bit of my mission in Mexico, the area presidency really focused on self-reliance. I think, being able to self-correct and self-motivate and self-rescue, not be so dependent on leaders so that we don't have to be maintained, but that we can do things on our own. And I think self-reliance is big in the idea of box that we have there.
Great talk, Elder Packer. Solving emotional problems in the Lord's way, I think is the title of that. Solving emotional problems in the Lord's way. Talking, among other things, about spiritual and emotional self-reliance and not needing to always be fixed in that regard. Kinsey, then Jordan.
I was just thinking of low maintenance and low yields. I was thinking just kind of the people who are just there. They don't need a lot of help, and they're usually there, and sometimes they participate, but they don't really put a lot of effort into action and being proactive. And I think it's really easy to jump into that. Especially if you just think of just doing activities of the church or going through the motions, it's easy to get into the low maintenance where you're not causing any problems, but you're not really building up the kingdom either.
Okay. So where do you want to put that? You want to write this under low yield, or under low maintenance? Under low maintenance, or we wanting to put, they don't need much attention, right? Low yield, in fact, will you come put that up there for us?
What's the name of the talk from President Packer you said?
Solving emotional problems in the Lord's way. I believe that's the title. I might have retiled it when I saved it to a Word document and titled it what I thought it should.
It's on YouTube, remember?
So I just wanted to clarify, it's a little confused, is yield like
what you
your
produce.
output?
Mhm.
So your production is yield, and maintenance is like how much work you need to put in, so it's input and output.
Mhm. So, and here's the tricky thing too, I said don't name names, but you're probably picturing faces.
Absolutely.
You're probably picturing faces.
Judgmental.
And so where this can become really dicey and not very helpful is if we're watching other people's dirty laundry from our dirty windows. You remember that comparison? So although it can be instructive, he said don't judge unrighteous judgment, but we can learn from other people. And you might look at this and think, yeah, I do know people where there is constantly a need for help and lift and motivation and correction, but there's not much that they're doing, that they're helping. We don't want to cast a lot of stones, but we want to start forming a picture, and in particular about who we want to be. Please.
I was just thinking about, I'm reading about Alma the Younger right now, and he was definitely high maintenance, low yield. And his dad, I'm sure, spent a lot of time trying to help him change. And he changed, and he became high yield, low maintenance, I mean super high yield when you really look at his life. So I'm wondering what makes the difference? How does somebody change and become great?
In his case, his yield at the beginning was negative. He was, right?
When I think of the high yield, low maintenance box, I think those people that you, like if they're asked to do something or as a group you're asked to do something, you're always kind of pleasantly surprised by how much they did with that. Like I have an executive secretary right now that, like every time we meet, I'm amazed with what he's done from one meeting to another, and it's more than you would expect him to do. And President Eyring in his biography, he said the most valuable education he got from the U of U, which this isn't a surprise, but it was on the grounds crew. And he said one time they said let's do this task, and he ran and he picked up a shovel and went to go to be noticed and started to give a pep talk like, all right guys, let's go, let's do this, and the guy took him aside and gave him a little lecture on serving in a way not to be noticed, But then he said his big lesson from the grounds crew was serve in a way that you're not noticed and always do more than people expect you to do. And that was kind of the life lesson he took from the U of U to go on to his other studies. And I think that's such fits that box. You aren't doing it for praise, but you always do a little bit more than anyone would even expect you to do.
Would you mind putting that in that box? High yield, low maintenance box. Thank you.
I think for the high maintenance, or low maintenance, high yield box, it's, people that don't need to be asked to do something, they just act when they see a need. So not only do they magnify a calling, or even, they just magnify their office as a member. Like, they don't need to have a calling, or, well, I'll wait till the bishop tells me to do it, then I'll come and clean up this trash.
You know where I fall short on this is I'll hear of a need, and I'll go to the bishop,
Yeah.
and I'll say, Bishop, I heard about this. Is it okay with you if I blah, 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 blah? Then I'll go to do it, and I'll find somebody who already did it. While I was talking to him, they were just doing it.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing, like in auxiliaries, a lot of times they just come up, well, we have to talk to the president, we have to talk, it's like, no, you just do it. If you get a prompting and you have a mantle over this person, like, do it,
Yeah.
just go and do. Stop.
And in some cases, it's just, you know there's a need, just do it.
Yeah.
Can you tell me any stories of high yield, low maintenance people you've known? We can tell those stories. High yield, low maintenance members, people that you've known. Let's just hear a couple of stories, and let's try to, for the sake of time, can you do it in a short and condensed version? Not the Lord of the Rings 6-hour extended version? Okay, let's start Jared and then Hannah.
There's a stake president on our mission that he just exuded so much love, and he was like, I don't know, when I think of high maintenance or high yield, low maintenance, I just think of him because he was always like exuding love without trying to like bring attention to himself. He was just doing.
As a missionary, you didn't feel when you interacted with him that you needed to persuade him. He had vision and was going, right?
Yeah.
He knew.
Which like wasn't. I mean, there was like, statement presence are like awesome people, but he just like stood out to me as someone who just like was that kind of disciple.
Yeah. Great.
I had a companion on my mission that she was my second companion, so I was just used to the one way. But she came in, she never needed time to unpack, she never decorated her desk, she would just sit right down with her scriptures and just read on this super huge bare desk and just read her scriptures, and she was the most powerful missionary I ever served with.
I love that. Thank you.
First one that came to my mind was one of my buddies that I went to school with at Stone College. We were roommates, and he just always went above and beyond what was expected of him. Simple example, when we're all walking around in the apartment and all that, my first reaction of a bunch of dirty dishes, knowing they're not mine, is, why can't people be clean? And here's his first reaction is, I'll just clean them. What a great example of like, just being willing to do it, even though they're not his, even though, he was the cleanest out of our whole apartment. A simple example like that, but man, he was just always looking to just take it one more step further, like I can do this much more, which was a great example.
I love it. We probably only have time for maybe one more. Jackson, will you give it?
I think of a visiting teacher that helped my family join the church. She was assigned to visit teach my family. A member of my family was a member of the church, just not active. She knocked on our door for 3 years while my grandma chased her off the porch, saying, "Get away from me." She refused to equate her value and her service with the outcome of her service. And after 3 years, my family finally let her in, and the rest is history.
So there was 3 years of not much payoff for her efforts. 3 years where she wasn't getting a lot, by way of maintenance, she wasn't getting a lot of payment for what she was doing. But the yield eventually kicked in, right? I knew a prune farmer from California. This is when I lived in Colville. And this guy, he sold his prune farm in California, or left it. I don't know if he owned it, but he worked on it. He left the prune farm and he came up and he was working at a KOA in Colville, Utah. And he was one of those guys that, had he not told me he was a prune farmer, I would have guessed pretty darn close. Maybe not prunes, but I would have guessed pretty darn close. It was a life of working out in the sun, a life of work. He was missing digits and wrinkled and, you know what I mean, that kind of the leathery complexion. It was a life of work. Convert to the church. He and his wife joined much later in their life, and he would come to our elders' quorum meetings, and he would sit there feeling like he had nothing to contribute. Joined the church later in life. I'm just a blue collar, he felt like he had nothing to contribute. And he'd sit there, and I learned very quickly that as soon as that gnarled hand would come up, because even though he felt like he didn't contribute, he knew about being an active learner though, and he would share. And I learned that when the gnarled hand went up, I would get ready to write. It would always be wisdom, always. And it was always this humble recognition. I remember one of them statements in particular where he talked, this maybe won't sound very profound to you, but the moment in the conversation, we were talking about the church doing this and the church doing that, and the hand came up and he said, we talk a lot about the church, and we're the church. And so if it's gonna get done, we need to do it. It was a very simple statement, and whenever he made his statements, he didn't I think he was very anxious that he wasn't very wise, but they were so helpful. Every time when I would leave the house to go to some project, service project, we're gonna go build a wheelchair ramp. We're gonna go and prune this person's trees. We're gonna go, I would go, and inevitably he was there before I got there and he was there after I left. And I asked him about it. I said, no one can beat you. You are always the one who's here doing this stuff. And he kind of downplayed it. And then later he came over to my home and that's a long story, but he came over to my home and he said, remember when you said that? And I did, and he said, you gotta know, I don't have much that I can offer by way of wisdom, but I can work. I know how to work. And I loved that guy. I just loved him. He was a workhorse. And he didn't need anything. Technically, he probably needed more than some of the people he was there serving. And you've heard Elder Bednar's character of Christ looking outward when the world would think it appropriate for you to look inward. That he always was looking outward. I hope you're forming some pictures about these high-yield, low-maintenance people that you've known. Why would we talk with you about it in here? This isn't gospel doctrine. It's not Elders Quorum. It's not Relief Society. Why would we have a discussion about being high-yield, low-maintenance disciples? Why in this setting? Please, Jordan.
Because there's 3 of you and like 30 of us.
Yeah.
because you can't be there all the time. And I'm just thinking of this person, like, the help that we do need and the guidance we do need, we can seek that out, but there's a certain amount of things that we kind of have to seek guidance from the principal and from the Lord and from the other resources.
And that would be true through your whole career.
Right, yeah.
Through your whole career. In the 6th chapter of Gospel Teaching and Learning, it tells you that really the greatest assessment is self-assessment, because we're only going to be there every few weeks, every couple or a few weeks. And so, but you're there every day. So when you walk out of a class, if you require having a pre-service trainer standing there telling you what you did right and what you didn't do right, this career's not going to work for you, because you won't have that throughout a career. That's part, right? That's part of what you're getting at. Why else? Why have this discussion, Spencer?
Well, I believe it's a sacred opportunity to be with those youth, and I didn't realize the responsibility of how many of those kids don't attend on Sunday. They don't have parents that go to church, and the only talk of heaven, Heavenly Father, the Savior, is in that classroom.
It's opposite of what you thought, right?
Exactly.
Because it was for me. I thought active churchgoers would come here, but I had no idea that sometimes we would get them and they don't on Sunday.
Yeah, and so if all they're getting is every other day, an hour and 20 minutes, hour and a half with me, I better be a high-yield, low-maintenance teacher if I want any shot at helping them develop in those kind of things.
I love that. Thank you.
I think it's actually, like, it could be very easy to cruise as a teacher. My little brother had a teacher, and he's like, I feel like he's just teaching from a manual. And he would tell me, and I'm like, yeah, he's totally just teaching the manual. Like, that's all he's doing. And I think it's very easy to just do what is expected. But in order to be an actual meaningful influence in their life, you have to do more than that. You have to care. You have to put in everything you have. And I think that requires so much more than...
Do you remember what President Kimball called it? He was referring to it as in membership in general, but what you're talking about professionally, he called them spiritual plateaus. Just kind of cruising. But going to church every Sunday, though. Yeah, that's great. I saw Cole and then Chris.
I mean, a lot of this I think is high yield. It's not just not requiring help, but I mean, there's a lot of things that you could, like administrative stuff, there's probably some things that you could get away with not doing, but if you want to yield high results, you call parents and ask where students are, and you're concerned about the kids that haven't come twice. I mean, so I mean, there's a lot expected of us. I mean, as employees, or, I mean, employees and gospel teachers, there's a lot expected of us.
When I was teaching at Bonneville Seminary in particular, that was the larger seminary that I anywhere else that I taught. This is up in Ogden. When I was teaching there, inevitably at the end of the school day, students would leave, and I would walk into someone's classroom, or someone else would walk into my classroom. This was almost every single day, where one of us would walk into the other person's classroom and would sit down on the piano bench or on one of the desks and just say, "So what did you do today? And what are you doing tomorrow?" And we'd just start to talk about what was coming up and how they had handled it and whatnot. Or if I had something happen with the student that I was really unsettled about and I felt I handled it wrong, I would go slip into somebody's office. Not to commiserate, not to talk about what a punk that kid was, but to figure out, what should I have done? Will you give me some feedback? Does that make me high maintenance?
No.
Well, you probably feel like you have to say that. It doesn't, does it though? To seek additional insight and to try to improve and to recognize resources around you for that, there's a lot of ways we can misinterpret this discussion if we're not careful. Before I take yours, Chris, were there thoughts about what we just said? That's where I saw some hands. Brother Martin, you start us.
Well, so just to share, this is a teacher that got hired, so I want to preface this with that. But when he first started teaching, I think that he had mistaken in his mind that spending a lot of time with the principal after school and sitting down with an hour with the principal and going through every lesson and everything he did and what the students did and how should I react to that, I think he thought that would be perceived as, wow, this guy's diligent. What it was perceived as is, do we want to do this to a principal for 30 years? And that's not, so we took him aside and we said, listen, relax. Like, just, you're a good teacher. You don't need to sit down for an hour after. And I almost felt relief come over him that he thought that being high maintenance was being diligent. And you see how those two could be linked. And guess what happened to his teaching? It got way better. And to the point that he was a no-brainer when it came to the hiring meeting, and we didn't even have a discussion about him. And so I think sometimes that in an attempt to appear, and when I say that, I don't think you're some hypocritical, I was in your shoes once too, and I remember wanting to be my best self to the trainers. But sometimes in an attempt to do that, we actually become high maintenance.
So we want to have this discussion. We want it to be understood and not misunderstood. Our newer student teachers maybe haven't heard the analogy of the Mombasa Highway yet. Can one of our veteran student teachers explain the concept of the Mombasa Highway, what we're talking about with that? Any of you remember it well enough?
Stop me if I'm wrong. It's a highway that has been paved over so many times they've never torn up the asphalt, so it sits about that high up off the road.
No shoulder.
Yeah, so if your car drifts off one way, you'll fall and break it, but if you drift the other way, you're in oncoming traffic. You can't go too far one way or the other. You need to stay right in the middle.
And we use that analogy in here to talk about how we'll have training, and if we're not careful, you'll go out because you're so obedient, you're so good, and you want to do well. You may go out, and we've warned you about this side of the Mombasa Highway, and you'll go and you'll overcorrect and go off the other side of the Mombasa Highway. Because that's the kind of people you are. You're just good and responsive. And so we want to be kind of delicate with this a little bit. You'll need correction throughout your career, and you'll need some assistance. It doesn't mean you can never seek it, but there's a balance to it. Chris, I deferred. I kept waiting.
No, actually, my comment.
Oh no, I waited too long.
No, remember, it's no good, so keep
Are you sure, Chris?
Yeah.
Okay, Adam.
So the school that I taught at this last semester, one of the teachers has been teaching for about 15 years and the other teacher has been teaching for over 20. And I consciously made sure that I did not come on as overbearing and wanting to know everything about what they did. But I listened to their classes a couple times, I listened to their lessons, and they did little things, and I would just ask them, hey, and you would see the guidance that the Spirit had given them, and they had been prompted to prepare things in a way that, and some of my best lessons in which the students were most engaged and felt the importance of the doctrine came from ideas that they shared with me. And as soon as I asked a couple times, I didn't have to go back to them. When they had good experiences, they came to me like, hey, Brother James, I just want to share this with you. I had this experience in class with the students, this is what I did. And then they would ask me, what did like, and they would ask me for things that I had done in class. But I just felt that first of all, the wealth of knowledge, but also the guidance that they had received, I had been able to be a partaker of that as well, and use some of those things in my class. So,
Last Friday, we were with the new student teachers, and we talked a little about, we talked about several different topics. One of the things that we talked about was being shepherds. And then what really should motivate us, Brother Boyle talked about, what really should motivate us is a love for these students. And so what I'm saying now, I don't want it to undermine that, because that is what should motivate us. Think also, in addition to that, about if throughout a career, we have to fight you to get roles in. Or if it's a constant thing to say, have you called home about that student that's missing? Have you done anything with that yet? Think about what we're, again, signing on for 30 years. The motivation should be the love for the student. There's also the additional element that, well, that's gonna be a pain in the neck if we have to fight you on everything. If when it's time for timesheets to come in, we're missing timesheets, this wasn't designed as a lecture for you. We will talk to you individually if there's problems that way, but it's something to constantly be aware of. Am I producing for this kingdom, for this work, without needing constant pushing? Please, Chris.
I guess my comment will, I was going to say earlier, what came to my mind with the high yield, low maintenance thing is there's a line that I heard about charity once, that a person who's charitable subjugates their wants for the needs of others. And as a seminary teacher, I think sometimes you might have a want after a day of teaching where you just want to sit, or I just want to go home now. But there's that missing student. And if you've got that high maintenance, that low maintenance, high yield attitude, you'll be charitable and you'll automatically just say, well, I don't care that I'm tired, I want to get a hold of this student's parents. And so I think just charity.
I'm glad you shared that, Chris. We want you thinking about that. We need high yield, low maintenance people on the faculties. Can I just take another couple of minutes and can I give you 4 suggestions? Just 4. There could be so many more. These are 4 that maybe will start trying to pump a little bit. Some things not only for this work of being seminary teachers, but for the larger work of the kingdom, being disciples. There are some things that we do or don't do that enable more from us, that enable us to do more. There are choices that, like my parole violator friend learned, there are some that take us further from being able to help. There's an institute class, I think they still offer it, entitled The Gospel and the Productive Life. And even if you don't take the class, buy the book or get it downloaded on your Gospel Library app. It is so good. 4 things to consider. Throughout your career, will you please avoid debt and manage your finances wisely? You understand how that impacts yield? It could potentially impact yield. If you're worried about finances, if there's been some financial mismanagement, and you're worried about that, you may be making some decisions that will get you in trouble, or that will bind you, or that will, at minimum, make a distraction in the classroom for you and for students. Number 2, learn all you can. Seek learning. Now, you may not necessarily go on to get a PhD, but you should be lifelong students. Hannah talked about teachers who sometimes go a little bit on autopilot. I had an institute class from Bob Clower down at Cedar City Institute. He was approaching retirement. The man had taught at BYU, the Jerusalem Center. He wasn't even on the BYU faculty, but they had him go and teach there. He's just incredible. And I had a Parables of Jesus class from him that he had to have taught 100 times. And he was reinventing it every single time, trying to figure out, how can I do this better? How can I do this better? He's the one that I told some of you that I went into his office one day, and his books up on his shelf, there were pink slips coming out of them. And I said, what are the pink slips for? And he said, well, I thought, I've got too many books. I got to get rid of some of these books. So I decided about 6 months ago that I would do an experiment, and every time I read from a book, I'll put a little pink slip of paper in it, and that will tell me what books I use and what I don't, and I'll throw out the ones that don't get very many pink slips in them. It was like an avalanche of pink slips. These books, it was like it was just this, it was like a float in a parade, all this pink around me. He's constantly reading, constantly studying, constantly searching, and sharpening the saw. Always seek learning. We have one of our colleagues, Brother Nate Burton in Ogden, and I love his heart. I think you're going to hear Nate Burton's name a lot in seminaries and institutes. And the thing that I love the very most, well, the second thing, the thing I love most, he's just a humble, good-hearted man. But he is a rabid learner. He wants to know. I love that about him. The third one, observe the laws of physical health. That seems like a strange thing to talk about. Can you see how it impacts yield? Now, I've known people who are in pretty rotten shape who are high yield. But they're dealing with, they're working with the hand that they've been dealt. And if you can control things like that, control as much as you can control. That makes sense, doesn't it? Observe the laws of physical health. Do everything you can to be a good instrument in his hands. The balance to that, like I said, President Kimball once said, most of the work that's been done in this church has been done by people who just don't feel very well. You'll hate that I told that to you, because now you'll have to remember it. And we've got a guy in our ward, Jim Smeltzer, that on any given Sunday, he feels worse than anybody in that building, and he's there doing his calling. Number 4, learn. Sister Beck said this is the single most important skill a person can develop in life. What is it? You heard that quote. Single most important skill, learning to recognize and respond to the promptings of the Spirit. Learn how he speaks to you. He speaks to everybody in different ways, and he speaks to you in different ways. There are sometimes where it's still and small and quiet, and there's times where it's much higher in the decibel range. Learn how he speaks to you and act. And if our most recent prophet was a perfect example of acting, of responding when prompted, I don't know where we'll find it better. Yeah, I got a little preachy there with some of that. I hope you'll forgive me. But you need to have free hands. You are such wonderful people. We need you throughout a career to be free to serve. Whether it's with us, or whether it's in some other setting and some other calling or whatever, you are so well equipped. If you'll continue to work towards being high yield, low maintenance disciples, you will be amazed at the things that he does through you. I'm amazed always that he works through us, weak and simple things, but he does, and I'm thankful for it. I want to be the best vessel I can be for him. Small, simple, but empty and open and ready to be put to work. And I know that you want the same. We'll work together at that, and say that in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen. Amen. We wanted to allow some time. Now, our new student teachers, you just had this opportunity on Friday, but it could be that since Friday, you've had some time to think a little bit more about that. We wanted to allow time at the beginning of a new semester that if there are any questions that you want to ask, we just want to be available for them. We thought we'd do some of that together like this, and then when it looks like it's kind of winding down, we'll conclude, and then if some of you want to talk to us individually about things that are more specific, we'll be available for that too. So, we won't necessarily need to bring up the seats necessarily, but if you have questions, now, again, these are questions like first weeks of school types of questions, teaching questions, pre-service process, hiring process questions, the career, what to anticipate with the career for you, for your family and whatnot. These are just open-ended Q&A time. So anything that you'd like to ask us. Little Boyle, you want to come on up? Please, fire at will.
So as far as the process goes, you know, when you're on track for your graduation, what happens when you graduate? So,
As far as the decisions regarding hiring,
You can be hired. You are, yeah.
the timing of this usually, we try to have the timing of this usually fall around when you're graduating. Some of you have already graduated, and so you're already eligible for hire. So usually, it's typically about April of the year that most of those decisions are being made. And that way, as you're wrapping up your degree, you're usually finding out if you've got a full-time job or not. We also tell people, though, and maybe this is actually the question behind the question, and that is, what if I need to apply for grad school? How do I know? What if I should be applying for other jobs? You should apply for grad school, and you should apply for other jobs. And then if this works to be a happy surprise, then you can let them know you won't be doing what you thought you were going to be doing. We had a sister last year that was, she was very likely about to get a job offer for an elementary school up in the north end of the county. And I know she was because principal's in my ward. And so she was about to get an offer, but she got an offer from seminaries and institutes, so she let them know she was no longer interested. Does that help at all?
Yeah.
If you get hired in April, when would you typically start?
You usually sign the contract in late April, early May.
Right then.
You just start right.
There's a thing called the student-teacher bridge that are, so you'll still only be teaching your part-time classes through the end of the year typically, but you'll be hired full-time, so though you're teaching 2 classes, you're working 40 hours a week typically, for that last month. And they have some things for you to study and write and do that helps you make the transition into full-time employment. So they hire you right away.
That's about the second week of May, isn't it? When they start the 40 hours a week? May 9th last year?
It might be a little bit earlier than that, because it seems like we had someone having a baby about the second week, and they were already on benefits by the time they had the baby.
Time that out if you can.
And then about the third week of May or so, there's an orientation in Salt Lake that's a couple of days that you go up to, but you usually send your papers before that.
Sorry, did you say third week of April?
May.
Oh, May.
Yeah. Other questions? Let's take them.
How do you guys balance your time between seminary, home life, and all that stuff?
Well, let's ask our stake president. With 3 ballerinas and.
So I know this has become almost cliche because it went around so much. I just think it's the most profound thing I've seen on it, and that's Elder Bednar's plate spinning analogy. Did all of you see that? That just resonated so much with me, and you just keep every plate spinning. But there are some practical things that this can consume your life. My wife is there have been times where, I remember one time we were walking and I looked down into a river and I was holding her hand and we were walking by this river and something struck me like an analogy I can share in class. And she stopped and looked at me and said, "I love you. I just want to be on a date with you. I don't want to be one of your seminary students." And I was like, oh.
And power.
I'll just do all those things in my mind then. But I think that there's,
Brother Webb's, do you remember Brother Webb's thing about, Brother Webb is the administrator for Seminaries and Institutes.
go ahead, yeah, I don't know.
He's also a stake president, or was, I don't know if
He is.
is he still? And so imagine being over all of seminaries and institutes throughout the world and a stake president, and he has a large family. And he said, you will never answer the question about which comes first the same every day. So there may be days where you have to say to your kids, I'm sorry, I've got to go take care of my calling, or I'm sorry, I've got parent-teacher conferences tonight, and I won't be able to be at your concert. There will be other times where you'll say, I'm sorry, I'm not going to be able to be to that meeting, my son has a concert. Does that make sense? He said, and the way he worded it was, if you're always answering it the same way, then there's probably not the right balance.
Which goes right along with what Elder Bednar said, right? I mean, really, those two could dovetail.
They all have to be.
He talked about telling his son, when he was a stake president, telling his son that by telling him sometimes, no, son, I can't stay and play with you. I have to go do some work for the Lord. And that his son knew the church was important to him. But if he always went and did that church calling, then his son would feel unimportant. But having moments where he said, you know what, yeah, I'm going to stay and play with you, those moments were important to let the son know he was important to him. And he said, I wouldn't want my son to miss out on either of those lessons. So it's important to, but I do think there's a little phrase that a friend of mine taught me. It's called win the hour. And you've heard win the day, you know, but for me, like, priorities are a little bit more fluid than what's the most important thing for me today, right? But as you make transitions, when you're at work, your highest priority should be work. But when you go home, you need to make that transition because you have a new highest priority. And you should organize your life in a way that when you're at church and you're doing a calling, or like, you can really be there. And you can really be doing the calling without being, you know, and if you left a bunch of things undone at work and it's weighing on your mind, and then you aren't going to be as good of a dad or mom or serving in your calling. And so I think whatever station you're in, win that moment, do what you need to do with it, and it frees up the next one. So,
Michael, can I just ask, what might be behind that? Is it the preparation time that feels like it's overwhelming for?
So it might just be new teacher jitters
Uh-huh.
and anxieties.
Doesn't go away.
But it's just like, when I stay there and I teach my class in the morning, and then I stay after to prepare, do prep time, but then I'm there for like 3 hours, and I'm like, no, I gotta go home and stuff, and then I go home and it's just in the back of my mind, and I'm like so anxious that I can't focus on what else I'm doing, and it's like, how do I not just go to bed anxious every night?
Isn't that a great question? Does anybody else relate to that? I think it's a great question. Part of that is the beginning, a new challenge and a new task in your life of teaching seminary. Having a new responsibility. It's gonna take over your brain for a little bit. I've struggled with that as I've had new assignments and new places. It takes over my brain for a little while. Right this time next month, you are going to feel much more balance in your life. You'll feel even more this time in March, and maybe in April, I don't know. No, I think it keeps getting better as time goes on, right? But don't be overwhelmed thinking that the way you feel right now is the way you will feel your entire career if this is your career. You will not feel that way.
You'll become more efficient at preparing the lesson, but you'll also learn that there are times where you just have to say, that's as good as it's gonna get. And when I would watch early morning teachers, they were burning the candle at both ends and had done all that they could, and it just really touched me consistently. How the analogy that I've used is they would come into class almost apologetically putting their offering on the altar, and he made more out of it. And so there are times where you just have to say, I've done everything I can in the time that I have to do it, and I still have finals to study for, I still have whatever, you know. And he makes more of it.
Okay, this is related to that, but there can be like negative effects in your life if this becomes too big of a part of your life. Which feels weird because it's the gospel. You know, and you're thinking, but I'm talking seminary teaching, which is not the gospel, but for example, if you go into your ward and in gospel doctrine, you've like learned all these new things all week, and you're gonna go in there and teach, you know, a lesson by raising your hand 4 or 5 times and teach what they should be teaching, and you will annoy your ward to death. And so those things become kind of, you want to be balanced, and I think what Brother Hunt said, I often have told student teachers the same thing. It's almost like when you bring your 2 fishes and 5 loaves, and that's all you got. But he's good enough to feed them. Like, you aren't the only one who's doing the feeding, and so.
I think, no, move on past it, Chris, and then Jordan.
I was gonna share some about it, is that okay? I mean,
Sure.
you guys are doing the answering, but I just wanted to bear testimony to what you just said. I had to set a limit for myself, because, you know, physics mind, I just wanna obsess over every chapter I prepare to teach. And so last semester I set a limit for myself, and a time limit on how long I prepare. Now, it was flexible if it needed to be, but a relative time limit. And I found that even when I felt like that's not enough, but if I felt that's all I had, I'd work through it for that amount of time, and that offering always was enough, every time. It was never not enough, even if I didn't feel like I did everything I wanted to do, it was enough for the Lord.
Thank you, thanks for that witness. Jordan, you have one?
Yeah, I was just gonna add to that, I think that part of the stress that comes with it isn't only time and balancing your time, but also knowing where your responsibility lies. And I think one of the things I struggled with last semester a little bit was feeling like personally responsible for the salvation of every student in every class. And so you have to be careful, because they have bishops, they have parents, they have a relationship, hopefully at least somewhat, with God. And so you do your part to teach them about the scriptures and to help them gain a love for the scriptures. But if you feel personally responsible for their salvation every day, it's going to be taxing, and it's going to be difficult to have the spirit every day and the energy you need to. So
That's an important addition, Jordan. Thank you.
Can I just, on that, Jordan, President Irving said that to seminary and institute teachers. He said when he was a young seminary teacher, he felt overwhelmed because he was trying to save those kids in his class. He said, when he said this, it took a huge weight off my shoulders. He said, I learned that the Lord has more shepherds than just me. Is that about accurate?
Sounds good to me.
The Lord has more shepherds than just you, right? And we've got to have faith in the Lord that this is His work. We can't stop it, no matter how bad our lesson is. We can't stop the Lord's work, right? We can't get between Him and His children. You know, our offering is good enough for Him. So,
Spencer.
I just had a question about lesson prep. It's the biggest challenge for me personally. I feel like each time I prep, like last month, like content and context, but then the next time I'm trying to figure out how to drive home principles, I am the living embodiment of the Mombasa Highway in my lesson prep on a daily basis. If you could just give me one tip from your careers, like what is the one consistent thing you did every time you prepped your lesson? Was there something that stood out? Maybe every lesson's different.
One helpful thing?
Yes, please.
No. So one thing I was going to say in relation to the balance question as well is get the what in your heart, but make sure you don't take so much time with the what that all of a sudden you're like, now I got to go teach it, and I haven't planned at all how I'm going to teach this. And so I think for me, the way I did it is one day I would do what we did together in the summer. Like that was one day for me. And then the next day...
Meaning you were finding principles.
Yeah, finding principles, and I was mastering the doctrine and going back and looking about Zeezrom and getting clear on that story and writing the cross references and You know, like I was doing all that. The what was one day. I would use a prep for the what, and then I'd cut it off, think about it, and over the next 24 hours-ish, I would have a lot of ideas about how to teach that. That would be add variety and things like that to it. And then the next day, I would use my prep to plan how I was going to teach it. So I did one day on what, one day on how, and then I felt that by doing it that way, splitting it up in 2 ways, I had more ideas, but also I didn't just plan the what and just what, and then sit there and think, oh man, like I know this stuff, but how am I going to teach it in a way that's engaging the seminary students? So that's one thing I did.
I have nothing more intelligent to offer than that. That's
This
great.
isn't intelligent, but I'll offer it. But one question that I would ask myself before I went into class was, what am I going to have my students testify of today? As I looked over a whole scripture block, what do I want them to bear testimony of to each other today? And that one question distilled and brought to the surface the most powerful, relevant, helpful things to me, and usually ended up in good experiences in my classroom.
I just had a question about doctrinal mastery, kind of change the subject a little bit, but we have a review coming up that they've asked us to do of just a basic review of the doctrinal mastery that's already been covered. Do you have any helpful suggestions on how to summarize that at the beginning of a lesson, or would you do it over the course of many lessons? I don't know. Do you have any ideas for helping to refresh their memory on the doctrinal mastery that you didn't cover with them?
I would ask the seminary principal what that seminary does in general, so you get a feel for what everybody has covered, how it's been covered, because from seminary to seminary, it's going to be really different.
Okay.
And so I'd get a feel for what's going on there, and then maybe go to a couple teachers and say, what are you doing to review doctrinal mastery? And just get their take. You'll get a good feel of the past there.
Do you have mentors at your schools? Have you been assigned a mentor? Raise your hand if you have been assigned a mentor-ish. Okay. Even if you are or are not, your principals are invited to assign you a mentor, but even if you are or are not, we hope that you'll look around on the faculty, especially if you're on a if it's more than just you and one other person there.
I've got you.
We hope you'll look around and you'll be able to see the teachers that you want to emulate, and you'll.
And if you want, we aren't saying like we'll tell you the good ones, but if you're wondering like, hey, I'm on this faculty, and there are some people that we've just interacted with and have confidence in, and not that we don't have confidence in the others, but we could usually say, oh, this person would be awesome. They'd be very helpful to you.
Just looking back at your career, how do you measure success in a seminary class, or how do you measure high yield? How did you have examples of how you knew that you really made a difference?
There's some things that you can put on a spreadsheet. You can tell how many students completed your class. That's something that you can observe impact. I've been calling home, I've been doing all that I can to try to increase that number, and it's increasing. So that's nice when you can do that.
And more than just your efforts, I would say when you're teaching effectively, you're going to have better completion numbers. Like, wouldn't you say that? That like it is the calling home and it is the shepherding, but also they want to come. Like they want to come and eat and partake of the lessons together. And so I would say that even more than just those administrative things, that is a sign of how the teaching is going as well. With that.
I'll give a shot at it, and then you can add. I feel like that number 4 that I gave you on that list, learning to recognize and respond to the promptings. The Lord, more often than not, I think, is very subtle, and you've got to ask to be told most of the time. And as you come out of a classroom, if you'll do what President Eyring suggests in the 6th chapter of Gospel Teaching and Learning Handbook and ask what worked, what didn't work, why did it work, why didn't it work, I think often it'll be rewarded with an answer. And sometimes I've left a classroom and I've been chastised by the Spirit. that was about you, it wasn't about the students. You shared that story to make you look good. Things like that. And then there's other times where I leave, where I feel much more settled and much more even thanked for doing what happened that day. And that becomes a gauge, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I was just gonna say the one thing that I think we gotta be careful that it's not is how many compliments we get from the students and how awesome they say we are. That's not the gauge, right? Because you can teach to that and get that without pleasing the spirit.
We've seen that happen.
Yeah.
Someone taught to student evaluations.
And what it's not, I would say, many times you don't know success in the short term. But like one day, we've had teachers where we've had to tell them, are you noticing the little victories? Because most of the time it's not you teaching a lesson and one day a kid's in there with piercings and a hoodie and the next day they come back in a shirt and tie and I'm going on the mission, like that's not how it happens. But you'll start to see, like there's the little moments, they have their head down and then all of a sudden they sit up and stare at you and are like listening to something. And you have to notice those little moments and to be happy with the very incremental improvement and find satisfaction in those little victories, because the ones that just turn overnight have been very rare in my experience, almost non-existent. But the ones that have slowly changed after a semester, and sometimes you get a letter 3 years later and you realize there were things going on that you never even saw.
From a student that you would never have supposed
Yeah.
that happened.
And so I would say be patient and look for little victories. And I think the Spirit will like every now and then it'll happen, a parent will come to parent-teacher conferences and they'll say like, my daughter just loves your class. And you're going, what? What was your daughter's name? But you realize through those little tender mercies the Lord gives you to help you keep going, there are things happening in the hearts of students. And anyway, and so I would look for those little small victories. It's so easy to notice the heads down, and it's so easy to notice some other things that if you get caught up and think that we're in the back of your classroom, which adds a heightened thing to this, where we're in the back of your classroom going, look at that, head down. That never happened to me, We know that the adventure of working with these kids to help them grow, and if that consumes you, it can become consuming. You have to look for those little victories and be happy for those little moments of light you see come into your students' eyes. So that's one thing I've noticed that way.
Here's the final word. You asked me if I want to get the final word. Well, you'll be glad you came after this. Just kidding. I'll just share a last experience to wrap up. Can I stand up so I can see everybody? And maybe this is a story I told last summer, I can't remember, but I was teaching at a youth conference in Monticello, Utah, and this was kind of a turning point for me. And I remember walking, so there was this amphitheater in the mountains, and the stake from Monticello was there. And as I was walking toward the amphitheater, the kids were already there listening to another speaker, and I was slated to come up next after this. And as I was getting closer and closer to it, I could hear the kids laughing, just roars of laughter. One after the other, just a roar of laughter. And I was like, oh, I'm next, huh? And then they closed that meeting, the kids came down the hill, and got a bunch of refreshments and stuff. And so I was in the middle of this crowd. We were walking back up there, and a couple kids behind me just said, "I wonder who the next guy is that's teaching us." And the other kid said, "Well, he better be funny." And I just felt myself the natural man in me was just rolling up my sleeves. They want funny, do they? Right? And I, to my discredit, I started doing that inwardly. And I felt an impression hit me, stop me in my tracks, and say, that is not a valid source of feedback. Not saying that that kid wasn't valid and that kid wasn't important, right? But for me in that moment, what it meant to me was, Tucker, is that really where you're going to get your feedback on whether or not you're doing the right thing when you teach the youth? And it stopped me, and as I kept walking up there, I was like, okay, I'm going to seek the Spirit as for my feedback. And I can remember teaching there, I remember the setting, I remember the feelings, and I went a different direction than I was going when I was rolling up my sleeves. And I remember having the opportunity to testify of the atonement that day in a very sacred, personal way to me that really was really personally powerful to me. I don't know if any kids left changed, but I definitely left changed. And I've thought about that time after time after time. And at times when my hearts have been there and I've taken my feedback from the Spirit, I've been able to learn things so much more profoundly. I've been able to learn from bad lessons, in a positive way, without beating myself up and saying, that was awful, I'm no good, right? But the Spirit can take that and say, hey, okay, remember what you did right there? Okay, try this next time, right? Don't let it ever turn into self-abuse when something goes bad, right? But if you can tune into that Spirit, like you did, those of you that served full-time missions, when you got 100 doors slammed in your face in a day and the Spirit pats you on the back and says, nice work, elder, or nice work, sister. That's our source of feedback in this work, right? The Lord is behind this work and the Spirit is in the work. And if we tune into that source of feedback, we'll get the feedback we need. And we leave that with you in the name of Jesus Christ, amen. Amen. The closing prayer was...
Our dear Heavenly Father, we're so grateful for this day, for the many blessings we have, the opportunity we have to teach and to testify and to excite these youth in the gospel and about our Savior Jesus Christ, about His grace and His atonement. We're so grateful for that power that enters into our lives and makes us more than we could ever be without it. We're so grateful for Prophet Joseph Smith, for all that he did to restore this church, and for the men who are called today to lead our church. We're so grateful for the work that President Monson did, for the example that he was to all of us. And we ask that you help us to be more like him, more like our Savior Jesus Christ every day. That we can take the correction that the Spirit gives us and become the best disciples we can be, and if we be the best seminary teachers that we can be. And we say this in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.